So yeah, today we're going to dive into Illustrator. Today's the day we're going to be focusing on the tools that you're going to be using. And so thinking back to the first project, you guys got feedback, right? Hopefully most of you got feedback from me. Or you just seen your different grade components. A lot of projects, if you're the way at least I perceive grading and overall successfulness of a project is like how well are you utilizing commanding the tools that you have available to you, and through those dynamic use of tools you'll more likely the more dynamic you are with tools, the more likely your project is going to be more successful. And that's true here, as well as since this is the last project we're doing, I really uphold how well you are visualizing your concept, right? Like how well is everybody grasping your concept through your work, because we are using type. So that being said, if you know that you're kind of slacking a little bit on Photoshop tools and exploration, you definitely want to make sure you're grasping the tools we go over today, so you have a good understanding of how to use them going into your project. So by all means, please ask as many questions as you need to as we go along. I don't know as if I will be able to hear. Yeah, I'm just going to close my text chat. I'm going to leave this up, just my Illustrator window and my web. So if you guys have questions, you're going to have to use your microphone so I can hear you. Otherwise, I won't see you have a question. I don't have my other computer up, so. So today we're going to be going over how to use the type tools. They're going to be more dynamic than you're used to. It's not just like, changing bold font or changing the typeface. We have more options than that. Here's a preview, right, of some different options. Then we're going to get into like how to transform objects. Well, not objects, I guess, but specifically how to transform type into objects. That's the first thing. Some other different tools. Then getting into using the pen tool. And the pen tool is going to be really what allows you to manipulate content. In Photoshop, we had a variety of different ways, right? Like transparencies and blend modes and filters. Here we have some of that menu stuff as well, but a lot of it's just going to be how well you're able to manipulate vector points to get the shapes how you want them. Thinking more design oriented rather than like abstract explorations. So after the pen tool, we get in a couple other different effects, such as like this warp mesh or envelop mesh tool, cutting things, combining shapes using Pathfinder. And then if we have time, we'll get into a couple other things like type on a path, color blend modes, and gradients. Gradients is a big one that's ramped up quite a lot. I mentioned before last class that I was going to look up tutorials for you guys for advanced stuff. But literally just like if you search for Illustrator on YouTube, any of them that have, not any of them I should say, but a lot of them that have like the AI logo on them, that is, most of those are from like Adobe, somebody who's certified through Adobe to teach the class, or to teach like how to use tools or so forth. So you can kind of just go down through, and a lot of times just find a preview of something that looks interesting, take a look, Like, oh, I like how this person's doing something, right? Just like I'm delivering how to use a bunch of tools right now. If you wanted to do something a little bit more creative or experimental, going through and checking out a couple of these, like, oh, how to make a pattern, right? You could be using that in your project. So those are all considered like use of tools. So we're going to start at the top. And hopefully, just as a side note, hopefully everybody watched Helvetica posted a reply to the movie. You know, there's a blog post about Helvetica, and you make a post on that, and then as well as your concept for your project 4. So hopefully everybody got those done. If you have not, you're already slipping behind for the final project here, so got to make sure you're keeping up. Everybody should have had installed Illustrator. Does anybody not have Illustrator installed? Should I be aware of this? Pretty sure I told both classes to make sure it's installed. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody in the chat or saying anything, so I'm assuming everybody has Illustrator. All right, we're just going to be diving in here. And do we set any specific things here? Oh, so the first thing you'll need is this practice file. So we're going to download that. And we're just opening that up. And this practice file, we're going to be kind of getting an overview of the program here, as well as how to start using the pen tool, which is going to be like our entryway into Illustrator, because we have direct creation and manipulation of vector points. So everybody should have this open, right? It was linked there on the website. I'll just wait a minute here and make sure everybody's opening this. Okay. So first thing I usually like to do is use the same kind of a lot of similar commands as Photoshop. So if you want to have this more centered on the canvas, you could just do Command 0. That'll center it to your current canvas size, right? Or window size, I should say. And I have stuff on the side here. Everybody should probably go up and just make sure we have the same workspace for the time being. So if we go to Window, Workspace, we can just go ahead and reset Essentials, or make sure it's set to Essentials. Okay. And I usually just like to have layers here. I mean, you could also put it like underneath or something. Doesn't really matter. I just like to have layers always on view in Illustrator. So as we can see here, if we hover over the different elements that are being highlighted, if you click on something, you actually will be able to select it. And you can see in the layers panel that we have a little blue box. And if you hover, it says indicates selected artwork, right? So we selected some kind of artwork on that layer. However, this is just a practice example. So we want to just leave those pieces in their place. If you move something, just Command Z undo it, but we just want to lock that layer, the locked shapes, right? Obviously we can like hide and show it, but and then we want to click the practice layer because this is the layer we're going to be drawing on. If we were still selected on that the locked shapes, when we want to draw something, it'll tell us we can't because we're on the wrong layer, right? So, okay, so just giving us a brief overview. Illustrator is pretty much set up similar way as Photoshop. Your properties panel can be important to have open as well because as you select different tools, you have different options for those tools in the properties panel. So a lot of times I just have properties and layers over here. Photoshop, it had like an options panel right at the top for each tool. This is more just in this properties window here. What else to talk about? In CC, not only do we have the tools that are default right here to us, and we could click and hold just like in Photoshop to get like the drop down options for that tool. We do now have the option in CC to edit our toolbar, this little 3 dots. So if we click that, we actually get all these other different options that we don't have necessarily already kind of set up in here. And some of them, yeah, so some of them they used to be underneath of other tools and now they're just separate. So depending on like how you move forward, and you could totally play with some of these, right? Or go over some external tutorials and play with these. As you find you're using any of these tools more, you just like Photoshop, you could actually drag things into your active toolbar, and then you have quicker access to them, right? Or drag them back off. So just making sure you guys are aware of that. Like the one tool actually that you guys will probably should have in here is the area type tool. So if we want to put that inside the type, we should. Any other of these types? Touch type tool, I've never done that. I don't know what that is. Well, there's extra type ones. The type in a path or type area type is definitely one to play with today. But just know there's more there. So beyond tools, you guys always should know on a Mac that, again, we have the ability to just go in here and search for any kind of menu option that we need, and it'll show us where it's at. So as you guys like need something and you don't have access to it, you could always find it. Like the tool I'm going to be covering more in depth a little bit here today is Pathfinder. So that's one tool that you might want to even jot down the name of because you probably won't remember it right off the bat. It's not up by default, right? It's actually a menu or a window option you can turn on. So as we go over these things, it could be helpful just to write it down, and then that way later when you go to work, you're like, oh yeah, what's that thing to combine shapes? Pathfinder. You could window show Pathfinder, right? And then you'd be able to have access to that menu. So what else? There are other types of effects that you could be playing with. I would more likely say that these effects would be good to play around with first few times you're in Illustrator. I would avoid applying a lot of these effects to your projects until a little bit later on once you have more of the layout set. You get a little bit more comfortable with like just the basic components. But just know that we do have the ability to play with some things. I will say right off the bat, nobody should try to be doing, is it 3D? Not 3D. 1 second. I think it's perspective. Yeah. Nobody should be using the perspective. All right. The perspective grid. Don't even go there. Chances are, once you turn it on, you also won't be able to even get it to turn back off easily. It's a tricky son of a gun. Anyhow, let us keep moving forward. We're going to just do this quick tutorial piece here so we can get back to our actual tutorial. We're going to be using the pen tool here just to try and replicate these points. So in our toolbar here, we have the pen tool, little looking pen. There is a drop down, and it looks like we are missing some of the pen pieces. So underneath of the add tools, or the edit toolbar, you can like put the add anchor point tool into the pen tool, delete anchor point tool in there if you want. We'll talk about more of why those matter in a little bit. But for right now, we're just going to be using the standard pen tool. And you're just going down one at a time. Make sure your practice layer is selected. You could always use the space bar, just like in Photoshop, to move your canvas, right? I always like to kind of focus in more on what I'm working on and then move around as need be. So that's what you'll see me doing quite normally. And so all we're going to be doing here just for practice is following these anchor point guidelines, these vector points that are already there. So all we do is we're going to click and let go. And then after we click and let go, as we move around, you'll see that we have a trail following off from that pen tool, right? This is very similar to Photoshop. But all we're going to do is then follow this guide. So the next point, we're going to click and let go, and then move, and just keep replicating this, right? And then once we get to the end, you'll notice that we still have this piece hanging off, right? And this is because Illustrator always assumes that your pen tool is being used to make a shape. And a shape has to be enclosed. If you don't finish a shape by enclosing it, it's not yet a shape, it's only an outline. It's only like a stroke, no fill really. So we have two options at this point. One, we could click the beginning to the anchor point where you have that little circle to enclose the shape. Or we could just hit escape and we just finish, right? So either way, that's all we're doing for right now. We're going to keep continuing. So you just hit escape or click the end, and that's it. Okay, and again, if you guys have questions, you got to turn on your mic and ask because I don't have the chat window open. This next one ends up tricking people because you're not familiar with how to do it necessarily. I'm going to go over a couple of different things. Number one, before we even start, this process is we're going to click and hold and drag. Whereas the first one was just like click, let go. To get these curves, these Bezier curves, which are these handles that come out that extend, we need to be dragging our vector plotted points. So we're just using these like thin lines as guides of where we're dragging to. So we're still clicking on these like big little square anchor point spots, but then we're dragging out, right? And if you mess up, you just Command Z, start over. But we're just dragging over, and you see like it's kind of snapping into place right now. We do have menu options to turn snapping on and off, which I'll cover in a bit. But if you're having a hard time too, you can always hold Shift, and Shift will keep it like at like a 90 degree or 45 degree angle, right, as you're dragging. But so we're just dragging to the end of that little line. It should kind of snap to the line even, and we let go. And now as you move around, you'll see that instead of a straight line, we have a curved line. And we have that curved line because we extended our Bezier curve arm out. It's kind of indicating to the program that we are creating a curved line, not a straight line. So now we go down to the second anchor point on our guide layer, and we're going to click and drag again. Not just a single click, but click and drag. Right? So some of you that have used this before, this might seem like super straightforward and simple, but others that haven't used this program before, understandably could be really confusing and weird to get working. And so I'd rather have people be able to solve a lot of people's questions and problems now, rather than like next week in an office hour because you didn't know how to do it.
You just go over the beginning of number 2, getting that first curved part.
Yes. So,
yeah.
Yep. So I haven't started it yet. So if you wanted to get rid of what you have going, you just hit Escape or Command Z like I did to go back to where I don't have anything. And I'll just have a different color just to show that I have a different color going. So we're just using these kind of like squares as guides to where we're clicking. And these little arms that are extending out on our guide layer, those are illustrating where we're dragging our click to. Okay? So it's kind of like we literally just click and I'm still holding my mouse down. And as I'm holding my mouse down, I'm dragging out to the end. And then once I'm to the end, I let go. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It is pretty straightforward. It's just like if you've never used it, it's really kind of weird to most people. And then as you go, we're just following that same principle. It's like the same thing 5 times. We're just clicking and dragging. And because we're doing it in these exact spots, we're getting the exact same curve as we see in the guide, right? If you don't follow the guide and you do something different, it's going to go off, but then even your subsequent line is going to be off. So each of those curved, dragged lines that you're doing not only affect the current curve, but also the upcoming curve. So it is a little tricky to first get your mind wrapped around using it in terms of like, drawing some kind of shape or character or piece. So again, when you get to the end of that, you could hit Escape, or you could just click the end, and it'll encapsulate that last piece. Okay, and then I'm going to hit Escape again. It looks like I don't even need to hit Escape again. But then we're going to come down to number 3. And okay, so number 3, again, we're clicking these points, and sorry they're the same color. I just now realized this for the first time. I wish they were a different color in hindsight, but we're going to click these anchor points on the edges, and we're just letting go, right? So the same premise as the first step, but as we go along, we're retaining just straight lines. And then as we get to the end, we want to click back the same beginning spot, which is outlined with a circle, right? Should have a little circle next to your pen tool, indicating that we have, in fact, reached the end, and we're going to enclose a shape. And once you click on that, your pen tool will no longer have a line that extends out of it. If you still have a line extending out of it, you probably just misclicked. Just Command Z and start it over. But this is showing you how you can then form a shape. And once you have a shape, you could like add a fill to it. So over here, you see how like your fill probably has like a line through it, meaning like no fill. And you could just click once to go back and forth of like which one you have selected, either the fill or stroke. And so there's two options. Number one, you could double click on something to add color to it, or if you just click on it once, it'll show up in a color guide if you have like a color guide open, or the color window, I should say. But that's all we're covering right now is just like, okay, we made a shape. Now we have the ability to change the color of the shape or like the stroke of the shape. Right? And I just want to also maybe say real briefly, because I want to make sure we're getting back to our tutorial. This stroke, if you click on it once, or actually, looks like just having the shape selected, right? In our properties panel, we have the ability of changing the stroke weight. So we could actually increase the weight of that stroke to whatever we want. Okay?
Show that again. Where's the weight part?
It's in properties panel.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yep. I want to say I'm missing something here, and I don't quite know what. I feel like my Illustrator window is changed, and I'm not seeing something that I should be seeing.
Wait, how did you select the shape? Like when you selected the whole shape, what'd you do?
Say again?
Well, how'd you select the shape? Like when you clicked on it? Because if I click on it, it just like puts down an anchor point.
Yep, so it's all based on which tool you have selected. Sorry, I kind of did that instinctively. Because the pen tool, we use that to make points and to draw shapes. So if we want to be selecting something, then we'd have to go back to the selection tool, which is the black one at the top. This is our primary selection tool. And then you can click on an object or click off an object. So another thing I was getting at the beginning, talking about, in Photoshop, we usually have an options bar at the top. We should have had it. I think when I did my reset of workspace, it closed it. If you guys don't have this options bar at the top, you definitely should, because I think I use that more than the properties panel, to be honest. So if you go to Window, you should have Control checked, right? And if you don't click it, then we have all of that stuff pop up at the top. So now, as we go through the different tools, it'll kind of update some of that info in that bar at the top. Okay. Last one. We're doing number 4. We're grabbing the pen tool again. And I'm in isolation mode. So if any of you accidentally do this, just a side note here, which I did, everything's kind of grayed out right now, except for this. And the reason being is because I double clicked on my shape. So right now I'm in an isolation mode. You can kind of see it here. It says in the layers panel. And up here at the top of my canvas, I have like these weird kind of like path looking things. Two ways to get out of it. You can either just go back right here to go back to like all of your content, or you could double click off of your selection. See, like I double click on it, it's in isolation mode, I double click off. I personally don't even work in isolation mode. It's kind of a way of like locking all of your layers really quickly so you could just work on what you're wanting to work on. When I first learned Illustrator, that wasn't a thing, so I kind of gravitate towards like more of an old school, slow person way of working, I guess. But anyhow, grabbing the pen tool, we are going to do step 4. We're going to click and drag like we did in step 2, right? Clicking the point and dragging out to that arm. And we're working our way around to the right. You'll notice that on the third point, I put the arm in the wrong direction, partially because I'm an idiot, but also partially because I forget to go back and change it. So this step is kind of a good example of how you might click and drag over, and then your line that is stemming from your previous point should kind of go to the edge of that circle that's already there, right? And another point you could be making is we could look at the end, like the other end of our Bezier curve, right? We're dragging out one side of it, but the other side is equally as long. We can kind of just match up that equally as long piece to like the edge of this this guide that I put here, if that's making sense, right? And then we're just going into the rest, clicking and dragging. And even same thing as the last one now, when you're creating a curved shape, a curved object for a last point, you don't have to just click and let go. You can click and drag the last point as well. And you want to make sure that that curves out as well. Otherwise, you won't have a equal looking circle. So definitely curved shapes are trickier, but that's the point here, is to make sure you're grasping all of the ways we can create these shapes. Anybody have questions?
Nope.
Okay. We're going to officially start our practice then today. You can close that. So we're going to make a new file. We're going to have it in RGB because your projects are going to be in RGB. I say again, your projects are going to be in RGB color space. So we're going to review how to do that. And then once we get it up, we're going to save and then make a word. So, assuming you've closed that practice file, we're going to go ahead and in Illustrator, we're going to go to New, Create New. And similar to Photoshop, it's going to give us like a bunch of presets. I really don't care what we select here. Any size is fine. Probably bigger than 640, I would assume. So if we go to Web, as a preset, like the Web tab, maybe we could just use like this minimum one here. That's a little bit bigger. Okay. And then because it is Web is RGB because it's going to be screen mode, right? Where you don't look at the web on a printed page. So it should already be in RGB color mode. We don't want CMYK, and 72 is fine because unless you know your computer's like 4K compatible or a higher definition monitor, you could go a little bit higher with the screen resolution. That's up to you. It doesn't matter. It's just going to be a larger file size when you save it. So we'll hit create. We're going to go ahead and file save as. Make sure we just get this set up. We're going to put this just maybe on the desktop in your class folder or whatever. I'm going to put this exercise 4. 1. Hit save. And then after we save, you'll notice here that we have a second option, which generally we didn't have for Photoshop. This is kind of showing you that we have the ability to save 4 older versions of Illustrator. And this isn't super critical to be worrying about for us because you're just going to be saving it as the top one here. Just know that if you're working with somebody else and they don't have CC, if they only have say CS6, then, or I've even worked with print shops that, like while I had CS6, which was the newest back a couple years ago, some print shops still had like CS3 or CS4. So just because technology is newer doesn't mean everybody goes out and buys it, right? So this is a way to, and you wouldn't want to save your main file as a backward compatible. You would still save it as your new file type. And then when you go to send it to somebody, you save as, one of these legacy formats. So you can just say OK for now. And we're going to grab the type tool, which is in our tools panel on the left. Just the normal type tool. It should just be a plain T. Right? I think a couple people joined us late. We're starting the exercise 4. So you need Illustrator open. And we're starting the first step here. So, well, we did an exercise, I guess, on the pen tool, but so we're starting this playing around with type, and then we're going to transform our type into objects. So why don't we just make, with the type tool selected, we're going to just click at the top somewhere real big and just drag way out. So, it doesn't have to be the entire canvas, but it should be a big chunk of the canvas. And right off the bat, it's going to fill it with just blank default text. Call this placeholder text, just filling the void. But we're going to go ahead, and since it's already selected, we're just going to go ahead and type a word out. And this could be any word that you want. It could be your name. It doesn't matter to me. Let's see, what's a good word? Farts. I'm gonna go with farts because I'm feeling spicy today. Not in a bad fart way. Just feeling spicy. Let's do once you have something up, we're gonna go ahead and select that type, which you can't see mine now because it's really tiny. Go ahead and select it, right? And then up at the top, assuming you have this options panel on. So again, ask questions if you're not getting something going. We're gonna click the drop down there and change this to the largest it can go. But we notice, assuming your box is like around as big as mine, it's nowhere near even filling that box, right? We want it to be bigger. So what you could actually do is you could arrow up or down. You can click in here once and then use your arrow keys to go up and down, right? So it's having this like all these flexible ways to allow you to change, or you could literally just type. So I might try like 300, and that looks pretty good. 300 looks pretty decent. You don't want to go all the way to the very end of the box, and you'll find out why here in a second. So now, go ahead.
Sorry, mine doesn't have like the how to change the size and everything.
Yeah, mine ain't there.
Yeah.
At the top?
Yeah.
Yep, I went over this option. If you don't have it showing up when you on your screen, you have to go to Window and have Control checked.
No, that's open. It's just, for me, it just says stroke, opacity. I have like a little color circle, character, paragraph.
Yeah, see, mine has control checked, but it's not like showing the
Yeah, mine too. There's a line, there's transform.
Try making the window a little bigger. That's what I did, and then it gave me the option.
Oh, okay.
Yep, and then also, I want you also, everybody, to be going to Window, down to Type, and having Character open. And I might even recommend like putting this Character tab, you know, just embedding it maybe over here. Somewhere, maybe like next to properties or something, just so it's there. I guess I kind of also like to have color and color guide here. So character, color guide, and layers. Anyhow, once you have why does this look like less than what I just had? Bear with me a second. Window type. I already did that one. I could have sworn all of this was together. Maybe it's not. But character should have... Okay, huh. Scale up or down. Baseline rising. Yeah, see, in our guide here, I have like a screenshot of the character panel. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 options. And now on the character panel we have 4. So I was just a little confused as to why. So again, most of the stuff is in the control at the top here as well. But if you don't have control, you might also need the paragraph window if you wanted to play around with indenting or aligning or anything like that. So what I want you guys to do is just take a couple minutes and play around with different typefaces here. One thing I like to do when I'm looking for a type is rather than clicking the drop down arrow and going down through all of the stuff, what I like to do is just click, have my type selected, but then click on the name of the current font and then just use my arrow key, just like I went over with you on the type size. And for some reason I can only do 3 right now, which is really annoying me. Interesting. It only allows me to go like 3 up or down with my arrow keys. I have no clue why. But we're going to pick a couple different fonts. And so not only do I want you guys to play around with the entire word, but then also like select even just a couple different letters and change fonts with that. Right? We're trying to get a couple different options. And you'll see like this. If you're like previewing a font and your whole thing goes white, you'll also notice at the bottom right of your text window, it'll show like a little red plus sign. That's indicating you have type that's too large to preview in your window. And that's why I was saying you don't want to go too large with your font size, because you might run into the problem of like, oh, a lot of these fonts won't even fit in your window now. So if you're having that happen a lot, you would probably just need to shrink your font size a little bit. Okay, so I would say just pick a few different little options for typefaces. And it looks like I do have too large of type. I'm going to go to 275. Ah, that is so weird. I don't know why, how or why they have things like they do, but so you know how I said to go open the character panel? Like this is the character panel, right? All caps, superscript. That's just changing your selection right now. But anyway, you know how we only have 4 options here? Up here, for those of you who are lucky enough to have this up here, for whatever reason some of you can't. Yeah, other than just making your window larger. If you click on the character up here in the tool kind of panel, we get like all of these options. So I don't know why this character panel is different than this character panel, but it kind of drives me a little crazy as an instructor. Like why they have to change things to make them more complicated instead of streamlined. Anyhow, this is what I was wanting you to do now though, is kind of play around with these different abilities to change the font size. This is the one big thing I wanted to show you. So say you have a space in here like this. This isn't technically a space. I rotated the S. But say you have like a big gap in between letters and it almost looks like 2 different words, right? And you want to be like, well, it's not 2 different words. Why do, like maybe even between my F and my A, because they're 2 different typefaces, the spacing doesn't really make sense. So we have to adjust the spacing, right? So it looks more like they're 1 word. So if we select the first letter of that gap, we could then adjust the tracking right here, which is actually called kerning. So I'm not sure why they try to change it from tracking or to tracking, but this is what we consider kerning letters. And so if we shrink this size, which again we could just click in there and use our arrow keys if we wanted to, we could bring the rest of the letters over, right? So it looks more like it's 1 word. And the one thing you want to think of while you're doing this kind of work you really want to focus on this kind of like spacing elements when you're doing like titles of things, people's names. You want to make sure that kind of header kind of content is as good as it can be, right? Especially if hundreds of people are going to be looking at it. So spaces like this, like that between an A and an R, you can get away with a little less space there if you wanted to, because we don't need a gap there to differentiate the two letters, right? I mean, if we went all the way over to where it's a ligature, then it probably doesn't read the right way. You know, like that's an A and R now. Can we read it as an A and R? Probably not. So I'm just gonna put that back. But we can get away with a little bit less space in between those characters because we don't need it to read the character. The difference would be like right here between an R and a T, we do need like this negative space to read the character, right? So as soon as you start dropping the space between that, it actually becomes less legible to read the letter, right? Say if we bring it all the way over to there, it kind of looks too abrupt. It's like putting a wall in front of somebody's face, right? So I just wanted to cover a couple of those minor pieces that you can be playing with. We should also have the option under the character panel to raise the baseline. So you could like raise a letter up or down. And what's crazy is like we're actually changing the type itself, right? This isn't changing like shapes on a page. It's actually the actual written type as characters. We are going to actually now expand it into type, but I just wanted to show you guys you have the option to be playing around with these things beforehand. Okay. So I'm assuming you guys have played a little bit here. And see how like I've kind of already started activating this type just by moving it around, changing a couple character properties. This is kind of like the opening for the project, right? Playing with type. So now that we have something, why don't we just take a pause on what you have. And we're going to go up to the selection tool, which more of you advanced people, right off the bat, you're going to want to start using V as a way to get to the selection tool. However, one thing that I always do all the time is like, I'll be in here editing. I'm like, okay, I need my selection tool now. I'll go to hit V and idiotically you'll realize like, oh, duh, I have to click out of here first. So there is a workaround. You could hold Command first, right? And then you could click, but you're still not really getting, it's like soft selecting the selection tool, and then when you let go, it goes back. So you can still move it around, but you're not really selecting it per se. You just have the ability to like move the box temporarily. So we want to actually go up and click the selection tool. Have this text box selected, right? We'll see outlines. And then we're going to go up to, I want to show you both options, so let me double check what the first one is. I never use this one, so default. Once you create outlines from regular, I don't even remember where this is at. Create outlines. So it's under the type menu. I actually prefer to go to object and expand. That's just how I learned it. Either way, if you create outlines or expand, you'll get this. I think you get that same option for create outlines. No, if you create outlines, it just does it, apparently. If you do the object expand, you have sub kind of options. I always leave these alone anyway. Either way, you'll end up having vector points now. Like this should be now a shape, right? It'll still look kind of like its type, but if you hold command while you have this selected, you'll actually see the outline or the vector points, right? If we click off and back on, it's still all kind of grouped together, but they're all individual points. Why are they grouped together? Every time you expand something, and this should also be for type, create outlines. Yeah, same thing with create outlines. Everything's grouped together. So once we expand something into vectors, the program just assumes everything that was in that selection previously is all part of the same object. When in fact, if they are separate, we want to tell it then afterwards that, oh, don't group them. And there's actually an option for that. Because we're dealing with objects, it's under the object menu, and we're just doing object ungroup. And again, I always use the hotkeys because I do these things a lot. You know, when I work in Illustrator, I convert things a lot, and grouping and ungrouping things is a lot easier if you use the hotkeys. So once you ungroup, if you deselect and then click back on something, you'll see that you have that individual shape selected, right? And from that point on, you can like scale, you can drag it, you can move it, do whatever you want. I'm kind of getting ahead. Just wanted to double check something real quick. Where's my gradient tool? I'll get into that in a second. Okay. Where are we at? We are going to make a letter drip. So choose your destiny here. I'm going to choose this maybe letter T because it looks pretty snazzy just sitting here. So I'm going to click on my T. I'm going to zoom in so it's most of my screen, I would say. Right? And we're going to make this look like it's dripping. So there's a lot of different ways we could approach that. You know, we could just we could grab the tool and just kind of draw something around or something like that. But we're going to actually manipulate the vector points that are already there. So again, if we want to see these more directly, we could hold command. You could see what vector points are already there. Or if we use this direct selection tool, the white head, this is actually, when we click on an object, this will automatically by default show us those vector points because the direct selection tool is designed to allow us to manipulate those points. Whereas the direct selection or the regular selection tool is moving the objects, right? So that's what you want to, the way that you want to remember it is like the black tool is moving actual objects. The white tool is moving points around inside, right? Having that specific ability to do one or the other. So if we notice right when if we click off and click back on, all with this direct selection tool, the white one, right? If we click off and click on, we should notice that all of these points are like solid color, blue. That blue color is actually just based on what layer color we're on. And like if you were to double click on the layer, you could actually change that if you wanted to, but that's just kind of illustrating to you which layer you're manipulating. And this could be helpful later on to see colors when you have multiple layers going. So those are solid color because all of them are currently selected. If I were to move this, like click and drag, it's moving the entire object because every single point is selected. However, if I just were to click and let go on one point, just like click and let go, you notice a couple things. Number one, all of the other points are now white. They're all not solid. And the only ones that are solid are that single one that we clicked on. Right? So now if we click on that again and drag, we actually can move that vector point. Right? We also have the Bezier curves here, so we can actually turn the point as well. Only point being right here is that we don't have enough points to manipulate to create a dripping effect easily. So to be able to do that, we need to add a couple more points. And the best way to do that, really the only way to do that, I guess, we're going to go up to the pen tool. And really what we need is the add pen or add anchor point component of the pen tool. So right now by default, you should see like, while this is selected, you should see that we have like a weird looking crosshair. If you hit the plus key, it'll shift right to the add anchor point tool. And then you could add an anchor point. However, and you notice in the tools panel, it's also the plus. However, I also just noticed if you have a selection made and you just go to the regular pen tool, it looks like it's allowing you to add anchor point by like natively now. Yeah, so natively, as long as you're pointing at your outline, you should be able to add points. So what I would do is add just like a couple points on here, like 2, maybe 3, not a ton, because once you have a ton, it's going to be too hard to manipulate the points. Okay, so this is like the bottom of mine right now. Once you have a couple added points with that pen tool, we're going to go back to the direct selection tool, the white one. And we're going to be clicking on these points one at a time and then dragging them. So some people, what they do accidentally is they, say this one's selected right now, it's darkened, and they want to move this one. They'll just go over here and click and drag this. Oh, and you can now. Okay, they changed this as well in CC. Perfect. That solves me from having to talk as much. Perfect. So what you need to do is just move these around a bit so that we can make this effect like it's dripping. So not only do you want to move your points down to estimated where the bottoms will be and where the tops will be, but then once you get those in place, you want to start using these Bezier curves to start getting more curvature out of your drips. I am not.
If I hold just a point on like an anchor point, it just moves the whole feed.
If you do what?
If I'm on the direct selection tool
Yeah.
and I go to my T and I just grab like, or I try to like,
You cut out. I didn't hear what you said.
I got it. I think.
Okay.
I don't know how I fixed it, but I got it.
You were moving the entire object?
Yeah, it was weird. It would, if I touch an anchor point, it would move the whole object, but for some odd reason, it just started to let me manipulate it. I don't know why.
It should have been moving the whole object because all of the anchor points were selected. So as soon as you highlight only one piece, you'll be able to, yeah. And like what you could do too, I want everybody to look real quick, is like with this direct selection selected, you can still like click and drag, and you only, whatever points are, selected, you can move all of them together. It's all based on what ones are actively selected. That's the key point here. I will cover one other piece too. So say you have a bottom of a letter like this, where it's square, right? And mine's not even quite square, but let's pretend it is. How about that? Whoa. If you guys have this weird snappy thing happening, we could turn guides off. You go to View Guides. No, right here. View under Guides. There's Snap to Point, Snap to Pixel. We turn some of this stuff off, and we should be able to move things a lot smoother. I often like to have the smart guides on, but you could always turn those off as well. Okay, so say you have a point like this. It's like a square point, right? Well, how do you make a square point look like it's dripping, right? Because when you click on it, all you have the ability to do is move it. You don't have like these anchor points on it, right? So some of you might have letters like that. Well, how do you get it so that you can manipulate it as a curve? Under the pen tool here, there should be an option called Anchor Point Tool. The Anchor Point tool allows you to convert from one type of anchor point to another. So if we don't have Bezier curves, we can click and drag out Bezier curves. If you have Bezier curves and you don't want them, you want them to be a point, you just click on that and it'll convert it to a point. Right? We're spending a lot of time on this because this is the base of the whole program. Like being able to manipulate these vector points is what everybody should be focusing on. And when we get to the project, like I said last class, I think I mentioned last class, I definitely did to one of the two classes. What ends up happening a lot of times is we get into these tutorials and then you guys start your projects and like nobody does anything that we covered in the tutorial for some reason. So I definitely want you all to be remembering that everything that we're going to be working on, you have the ability to go in and micromanage it, right? And manipulate the content. So the next piece I want us to do is off your letter that's dripping. We want to make a driplet, a little drop. So what I would like everybody to do is have your rulers on, which if you don't have them on, you hit Command R, will bring up rulers. Okay? And if you hover over your top ruler, we're able to like click on the ruler and then drag down a line. So we want to drag this line down below your drip here, and we're just going to let go. And that's now a guideline. And we'll do the same thing with the left side. We're going to drag over a guideline, and we're going to leave it like kind of right below one of our drips. And we're going to make a droplet right there. And we're using a guideline just because you guys are still getting used to the pen tool, and I want to show you how hopefully being like taking a little bit more of a symmetrical approach could help you out. So we're going to grab the pen tool again, the normal pen tool, and we're going to follow along with what I'm going to do here. So the first point is you want to just put up here a little bit further away from your crosshair here. You want to hover over the middle, and we're just going to click and let go. Okay. These next 2 points, we're going to click and drag. So somewhere down here on the right, we're going to click and drag down a bit. It doesn't matter how perfect, we're going to change it and let go. And now we're going to actually skip this middle line, and we're going to go over to the right side, and we're going to click and drag up and let go. And once we have that third point, we should be able to just point towards the first point again to get that little circle, and click and let go. Right? So we start with a regular click, then we'd have 2 drag clicks, and then a regular click as well. And once you have that, just like before, we can go to our direct selection tool. We could put our color in there, like black, to match the same color as we have our text color. And then if you wanted to, you could use your direct selection tool, which in this case, I'm going to hit the A on my keyboard, which goes to direct selection tool. And we can manipulate this if you want to tweak it a little bit. Maybe your droplet is a little bit bowed to one side or something. Right? And then once you have it close, we could always go up to View, Guides, and Clear Guides if we want to get rid of those lines. You could also hide them if you want. I often hide guides with the hotkeys, but so we should have something like this. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's just kind of like a test trial of like, oh, how do we make a droplet? Right? Once you have a droplet, I want you guys to try this. While holding you have the selection tool there selected. While holding Option, go ahead and once you hover over a shape, an object, you'll see like 2 pointed arrows. This is showing you that we can duplicate now since we're holding Option. So if we hold Option and click and drag the shape over somewhere else, we can let go, and it's copying and pasting, like a shortcut to copy and paste. So assuming you had a couple of drippy things going, we basically could quickly replicate that drip, and then maybe change the scale of a couple of them or something like that, right? Kind of change how it looks. Maybe one of them you drag inverted to itself, so it's like the opposite direction. Maybe we rotate one of them. Right? So that's the same drip repeated, flipped, rotated.
How did you get rid of the guidelines?
I went up to View, and there's a section for guides, and I cleared my guidelines. And if you ever forget that, you could go up to Help and type Guides, and it'll show you where. Man, apparently I haven't done a lot of talking because my jaw is super sore already. I talked all my first class too, I guess. So we are definitely behind on this, but I'm trying to make sure we have the base tools down. So now let's check out this warp tool, which I haven't played with for a while. So let's see. I don't even know where it's at. Warp is under Effect. So if we go up, if we use our selection tool, we select one of our other characters we haven't touched yet. And maybe this one will be a different color. If we go up to Effect, Warp, we should have a bunch of different options we could play with. So we could try inflating maybe. And as long as you have your preview selected, you'll be able to see how your effect is actually working. And we could always change it at like the drop down to a different effect. Maybe I want to like twist this. Right, so this is like one quick way of being able to manipulate a character into something slightly different. And mind you, this doesn't have to be on just text. This could be warping any object, right? Later on, once you realize that we can convert images into shapes, so say you import a picture of your face and you convert your face into, say, 3 colors, and you combine all of those pieces of each color into its own object, you could select each of those objects and manipulate them separately, right? Just spitballing really quickly, trying to get you guys thinking about objects instead of images. What's the next tool name here? Envelop Mesh, which I think is... No, I already forgot where that one is too. Envelop. Oh, there's a menu option for it. Select yet again a different shape. And we're going to go up to Object, Envelop Distort, and we're going to say Make with Mesh. And I would say just have like 2 by 2 for right now, maybe. Hit OK. 2 by 3, something like that. You don't need a lot. This is just to get a preview. Once you have that, this shape now is going to be manipulatable by the grid rather than individual vectors on the shape itself. So you just need your direct selection tool. You click which point you want to be manipulating, and then you can manipulate it. Right? Quick and simple. So there's definitely the ability to play around with some of these object manipulation components. Okay, I want to definitely get into a couple more things. First thing now is, say you have an object like this, and you want it to stick, right? You want that to be permanent. Same thing we did with like the text. You'd go up to Object and Expand. Okay, so you're kind of taking a preview of an effect and you're applying it. And now this is its own shape again. We're going to take that shape and cut it. And I don't know where the cut tool is because they always change things. Under the eraser? No, that's scissors. We might have to go to other options here. Knife, yes. So let's actually drag this, go to Edit Toolbar, find the knife. I'm going to drag the knife into the eraser. So we have like multiple options under the eraser. And for the knife tool, you don't want to click like inside the shape. You want to click outside and kind of cut over it. Kind of like you're cutting a piece of paper with a knife, you know, like a utility knife or an X-Acto knife. You want to click like on the surface and then go right through. And that'll separate the object into two pieces. So you just need to like deselect and then, oh, it's grouped still? Oh, okay. I don't know why it groups it together like that. I thought it was supposed to natively not group it, but you can ungroup it and then you should be able to move it separately, right? This is just another way of manipulating shapes. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. I'm going to add an ellipse tool. I'm going to grab the ellipse tool. It's underneath the rectangle. And I'm just going to make an ellipse like this. I'm going to get it close to my character, kind of like I'm replacing the piece that I cut off, right? Kind of making it close, like it was there. But there's still two separate pieces. How do we combine the two? Now this is getting into my favorite tool of this program, Pathfinder. So you guys are gonna have to go up to Window and select Pathfinder. And again, I'd expect everybody to be using this tool in their project to some degree, whether it be organization or manipulation. It's kind of like a soft requirement, so keep that in mind. We need Pathfinder open. And so what we want to do is, if we're going to be manipulating multiple shapes with one another, we need to have those multiple shapes selected. So the first thing is like using your selection tool, you could either click on a shape and hold shift and click another shape, or you could just click and drag over stuff. The clicking and dragging is fine, but like note that if you have other content around or background content, you might accidentally select the wrong thing. That's why I'm recommending you guys work on different layers when you're working on different components, right? Keeping things organized. Once you have these two pieces selected, go ahead and click this first option called Unite on the Pathfinder tool. Instantaneously, that should combine it, right? However, what do these other tool pieces do? You know? Let's do Command Z. And let's do the second one, minus front. Well, it deleted that front piece. How does it know which is the front, which is the back? Interesting question. You don't really know because they're two different colors. An easy way of deciphering which one's going to be the front and back, you could literally just change the color. Then you can see which one's the front and back. You could change the transparency or something maybe. Another thing is, under the object menu, you have the option of arranging things. So say right now this one shape is in the front, I could actually send it to back. And again, I use these hotkeys all the time to manipulate content. Right? As soon as I send it to back, now if you select these, hit the minus front, it's going to delete the other shape. So kind of going through all these options, if you Command Z, seeing what they do. I also use divide sometimes. After you hit divide, things will still be grouped together. We have to actually go up to expand. But once we expand after like dividing, weird, it's still not expanded. Oh, it's sorry, ungrouped. You have to ungroup it. Man, I need like another cup of coffee or something. After you ungroup something that you've path found, you can now move all those pieces individually. And this isn't like super crazy right now, but you know, if you start to get into like more experimental things, like, you know, what happens if you have all these stars here in the screen? What, like, you know, maybe you want to do something with all these stars in a specific way. Well, you could highlight all of them, pathfind it, ungroup it, and you can start getting rid of pieces, right? And this is like, oh, I'm just making some kind of texture or background thing. You could be deleting things, but you could also be reselecting and changing color, what have you, right? So I'm just giving this a quick preview that Pathfinder is basically like the most diverse way of manipulating objects in Illustrator. I usually use Pathfinder techniques more than I use things like the knife tool. If that's making sense. So let's say I have let's say I want to make a star. If I click once, I get the option to change options. Say if I want a 12-point star and I want this to be larger, I can put this A over here. This A, two things. I probably want to bring it to the front, but it's also not expanded. Expand appearance. I could minus the front on this, right? And now this is like, I'm going to undo that for a second. I'm going to minus front. Now this is a cutout. And now if this is over top of other shapes, as you can see through it, right? So that's why Pathfinder is going to be really amazing for you guys to play with. Anybody have questions so far? We have 3 things left. In the last few years, I've been leaning less against like finishing a finished drawing for a first exercise, and leading more towards experimenting and also just really being fluent with the tools that we're focusing on, rather than trying to like make a scene or something. But so we have 3 other tools we haven't talked about. I'm going to talk about those right now. First thing, let's grab the pen tool. I'm actually just going to make a new layer and work on the new layer. That way I can, have more ability to select things. With the pen tool, let's just click and drag and make like a weird curvy line thing. It doesn't really matter, although I would say make sure it's kind of fluid, like a wave almost maybe. We'll try that. Get something started, then hit escape, And for this purpose, we only want an outline. So we don't want to fill. So we want to just make sure it's just like a fill for right now. Okay. So again, we're just making a curvy line with the pen tool. Once you have that curvy line and you unselect it, like hit escape, we're going to click and hold on the type tool, and we're going to select type on a path. Okay. And with type on a path selected, we're going to hover over our line until it shows with the smart guides. It'll say path. Then you can click on that path, and it's automatically going to fill placeholder text just like it would be a normal text box. Okay. And my path is like atrocious apparently. I'm just going to try again. I guess I went too fast. Type on a path. Okay, so again, we could change a couple quick things. Again, why are people calling me? Only when I'm teaching. It is insane. I'm just gonna up the scale a bit. And you can quickly see that it doesn't work perfectly. And this is why it's important to then be able to manipulate things like kerning. You know, and actually, all this looks like maybe it's messed up. 0. So yeah, areas where things are overlapping, you would have to go back in and adjust the kerning so letters aren't hitting each other. Right? And once you get things close, you could always expand this type and then manipulate them as objects if you wanted to. But I just wanted to show you guys this because this applies to like any kind of shapes. It doesn't have to be a line. For instance, this F here, you can go like type on a path and do it on the outside of that F, I think. I say I think because apparently I'm getting an error. Non-compound. Why is it saying non-compound? Let's find out. Does that help if I draw a line on it? Yes. So I just cut, saying I can't draw on a compound path. Compound path is just like an enclosed object, I believe. That doesn't make sense. I don't know. This is something I'd help you with in office hours if you need it. But like, if you have a rectangle, you should be able to then like type on a rectangle, you know? Also, thing to note is, earlier I said make sure you put area type tool in the toolbar. You could also use that on shapes like any kind of shape. For instance, I'm going to draw it in this S right here. So I'm going to click on area on a area type tool. Let's click on a non-compound, non-masking path. Ah, okay, there we go. You have to click on the edge. I'm sorry, that's probably why I messed up last time. You'll notice that it's not filling. My text is just way too big. So if I say like 6. And I have something messed up here. 0. Right? So this is typing in a path. Well, you might ask yourself, well, what happened to your background? Bernard, why is your background not there? Fun fact, once you type on a path, it'll just convert that path into an outline. Right? So the way to get around that would be, I'm going to copy this, what I have. And I'm just going to Command Z until I go back to my shape. And then I can like edit, paste in place. And I could have my type over top, right? What's something else I can do with this that we've already covered? Well, how about this? This might blow some of you dudes away. I'm going to copy this S. I'm going to create a type tool. I'm going to go like this. And let's change the size to like really small. Why is this? It's like defaulting to my old character presets and it's kind of annoying. Okay, so say you have like type over top of type like this, right? And this could be any kind of type. You could be doing whatever you want. Maybe your kerning is like -200. It's really tight. And maybe your the leading, the space in between your lines is really tight. So it's still legible, but really compact, right? Makes it look kind of more like a texture almost. If I expand that type, and then I select all of this and the background, which is that S, I could cut out the front using Pathfinder. And all of a sudden, I have this new shape that's like, you know, it allows you to see through it. I'm hoping a lot of this is clicking. I know I'm going really fast. I just know that there's not a lot of time. So I'm trying to like both give everybody a base, but also allowing some of you more savvy with Illustrator to see how dynamic you can start to be pushing some things. So in terms of like using type, as you can see, we've already covered several. And then the way I did this S was a mesh. So number one, I used a mesh. Number two, I did a area type and changed the formatting of the type. Number three, I did a path find, and then I changed the scale to have it like be an overlay. So like, you know, it was pretty quick to do. I realize a lot of you haven't done that, but and one of the last things I wanted to show you guys is how to use the gradient tool. So instead of this being a color, you guys can select any shape that you have currently completed. Right? Mine's pretty complex, but you guys can choose anything. Then we can click the gradient tool. And then all you got to do is click the gradient tool once on top of your object you want to apply the gradient to. Okay? And I guess you'll notice here that all of my objects are kind of messed up. So I'm just going to quickly fix that with the Pathfinder and then redo my gradient. Oh, I guess I can't. Huh. I'd have to figure out why that's happening, but anyway, now that we have the gradient applied to something, is it K or is it L? K? H. So if you guys want to have something selected but see the preview of it, you can do Command H. That'll take off all of the little dots. Either way, it doesn't matter. So what we want to do is have the gradient window open. Because then if we have this open, we can change the gradient. So we bring this open, we click down here, it shows us our slider. We have the ability to change this. Is it a radial gradient coming out from the middle? Is it a free form gradient? What does that mean? It allows us to draw points. And you do have the ability in this to actually create your own gradient type. I haven't done it yet, so I can't really walk you through it. But in terms of just these two, radial and linear, just like Photoshop, I think we might have covered this in Photoshop. Clicking the bottom here on a color or double clicking allows you to change the color, right? You can change these colors at the bottom. You can change the opacity of the color. If you click and drag this little diamond at the top, you're changing how much of the gradient is fading or how fast the gradient's fading. And you could actually click at the bottom and add more points to add more colors if you wanted to add another color. Right? Anybody have questions? I realize I'm going over things quick, but I'm just trying to pack you guys in with stuff. So I want to make sure everybody is at least getting the minimum of like, oh, how to apply the gradient and, you know, how to adjust the gradient.
I have a question. Is this lecture going to be recorded, or?
Yeah, I'm recording it.
Thank you.
Yep. Is there one more thing or? Yeah, I'm just gonna go over this really quick too. Oh, I like how this is happening. I don't know what's going on here, but this looks pretty cool. Wow, I don't know what's going on there, but it's a cool effect. Okay, I just wanted to go over one quick thing. Why don't we just grab a rectangle, draw a rectangle, okay? And the fill just could be any color. Why is this doing a gradient? I don't want a gradient. That's annoying. Okay, so I'm hoping it's just a solid color. Then we're going to take an ellipse and make another shape and have that be a different color. Okay? That's all we're doing, drawing two shapes, two different colors. Right? Then we're going to go down here to this blend tool in the tools panel. We're going to click that. And all we're going to do is click one of the shapes and then click the other. And you should see that it's blending them together. What's pretty crazy is if we then use the selection tool, the direct selection tool, and click on one of these shapes, and we move that shape, it'll actually move the blend with it. So if you have one shape into another, it kind of creates like a gradient. You could be clicking on individual points of this shape and still be manipulating it and moving it around. Another point to make is if you go back to the, I'm gonna undo a few times here until I'm back to this. If we double click on the blend option on the blend tool, we have two different options, one smooth color and one specified steps or distance, but I like the steps. You could actually choose how many steps, and you not only get the color to change, but you actually can see the shape changing, right? So this ends up being pretty powerful, especially if you do something like this. Like if if I use that with this shape and then with this shape up here, will it even work? Maybe, maybe not. No. Some shapes might be too complex, looks like. But this one I did it with the S. And you can see how it's changing. What's really interesting now is once you have this set up and you're like, oh, you know what? I really want this one piece out of here. How do I just get to have that one piece, right? Like a transformation or something. Well, you do the same thing we did before, expand it, ungroup it, and then you have your individual piece. So that's everything I wanted to cover. Just some of it I went a little bit fast towards the end. I'm really just hoping everybody got the base stuff about manipulating vectors and some different ways of using the type tools. So yeah, class is over, and then if you guys have a quick question, I can hang out here for a couple minutes. Just make sure everybody's doing their sketches for their project.